In the 36 years since atomic bombs devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the United States and the Soviet Union have been locked in a spiraling arms race that already threatens humanity with nuclear extinction. Opposition to this headlong rush has grown from isolated groups protesting in the shadow of massive Vietnam-era demonstrations. Today, the anti-nuclear movement has become a groundswell of international opinion. This rally was staged to mark the opening of the United Nations Special Session on Disarmament and demand a bilateral freeze on nuclear weapons and reversal of the costly arms race. With the national unemployment rate above 10%, President Reagan's proposed 1983 budget calls for a $33.1 billion increase in defense spending and cuts nearly $26 billion from domestic social programs. Nuclear activists are calling for the redirection of that massive military funding to meet vital human needs in these hard economic times. America's nuclear arsenal is designed by scientists at the University of California's Lawrence Radiation Laboratory in Livermore. This facility is a think tank where weapons of nuclear holocaust are conceived, such as the MX and cruise missiles and the neutron bomb. The recent escalation with these new weapons systems supports the scenario of a limited nuclear exchange or preemptive first strike against hardened Soviet missile silos. The lab has been the target of growing controversy and numerous demonstrations over the past 10 years. On June 19th, over 2,000 people gathered to blockade the facility and deny the staff access. Over 1,200 were arrested in the peaceful action that followed. It was the focus of extensive coverage in the national and local media, underscoring the growing numbers and resolve of the anti-nuclear movement in the United States. Nonviolent civil disobedience is considered a powerful tool in staging effective demonstrations.
Our country was founded on civil disobedience, and it's been very much a part of the fabric of our history. It began, of course, when the country was founded and has gone all the way through, and I might enumerate the Boston Tea Party, the suffragette movement, and the black movement now, is with Martin Luther King. And of course, we have Henry David Thoreau was one of the people who put out that philosophy and gained momentum in this country.
I'd rather be arrested than be in a nuclear war. And I'd rather be arrested than have children with birth defects. And I'd rather be arrested than die from cancer from radioactive waste. Part of the training is role-playing so that we see what it's like to be a policeman on a blockade. We see what it's like to be a blockader. We learn how to handle ourselves in confrontative situations, what other people's reactions might be, and what to think about in terms of talking our way out of something if that's necessary, instead of taking some sort of violent action.
Incidentally, Livermore has called a paid holiday for its employees. The numbers and the determination of this group already have told them that they want to let people stay home. So we've already achieved our purpose, a success. There will be no business as usual on June 21st. And to those Livermore workers who are here today or can hear my voice in the great radio audience and whatnot, let me tell you a good way to use that day. You are very welcome to join us in those affinity groups outside your building, and I hope you're there.
Sonoma County people came from other places, though, and we gathered together at about 4:30 in the morning on the far side of the Livermore compound. And there we proceeded to get in the way of the traffic and stop the workers, little batches of us. It seemed like the most effective way of doing it was lots and lots of real small groups, kind of sneaking up here and there, and there just weren't enough police to go around. So it took the police a long time to move us, and we spread it out over a number of hours, constantly getting in and slowing down the traffic.
As I'm standing here, I'll probably be arrested.
How long have you been on the line?
Oh, I'm a replacement. I've been here about an hour.
Are there still cars coming through, the vans coming through with workers?
Press and police.
Just press and police?
Either way.
How have the police been so far today?
Well, I haven't been arrested, but I think over 1,000 people have been arrested. That's how the police have been.
Of the people who were arrested, have you heard of any violence from the police?
I don't think so. I don't think there's been any violence at all.
Can you tell us a little bit about the march around the Bay?
Well, we walked about 113 miles from Saturday's rally in San Francisco to the rally in Oakland Park, leafleting and communicating with people the need for disarmament, and mainly for the survival of the human race.
What kind of response did you get from the people you met along the way?
I'd say about 95% really positive. They were with us all the way.
My only hope is that the rallies and demonstrations such as this one will make the public more aware. And if the public is more aware, including legislators in Washington, state, local, and federal, government might just be affected by these changes.
Have you had a chance to talk to any of the workers at all?
Just a few, and only very briefly myself.
Did they make any statements to you?
For the most part, they did not want, I would say they did not want to think about their job there, about the implications of working at Lawrence Livermore Lab, and they certainly didn't want to talk about it.
In the Pentagon, they have this little box.
There will be.
Little box with the missile.
There will be European
soldiers.
soldiers.
Button, and maybe 45 nuclear heads will just go flying into any of their places of Russia. And even if they are Russian, or even if they're from somewhere else, there's still people who are going to get killed.
That's right. People will get killed.
And I bet you
why don't you go home today? Why don't you go home today? Do you think it's right for people to be killed?
Of course not.
Okay, then why don't you take the day off today? Why don't you take the day off today? Why don't you go home?
I told you before.
Because you work here and you might not get paid?
No, I'll get paid, whether I work or not.
Well, then why don't you just get another job and not work?
Excuse me, can I ask you a question? You work in the lab, right?
Yes, I do.
What do you do in there?
I work on electronic equipment for diagnostics of nuclear tests.
How do you feel about the blockade today?
Well, I support people's desire not to have nuclear weapons, but I don't support illegal activity in order to convince people in this country not to support nuclear weapons.
What's your feeling about the blockaders? Have they been civil? Have you got
Well, they've been very civil. They won't let me get to work, but otherwise they've been very civil. They're violating my civil rights by not allowing me to go to work. But they're obviously not violent. They're not in favor of violence, or they wouldn't be here.
Is there a consensus? Is there any consensus in the lab about nuclear weapons? About the reason these blockaders are here?
Well, I think most people in the lab are working on nuclear weapons because they feel that that's the best deterrent we have to offer to prevent them from being used by anyone else. And I think most people in the lab feel that the people that are out here are peace-loving and want to prevent nuclear war, but don't feel they're going around it in possibly the best manner.
Has anyone in there come up with an idea about the best manner?
Well, I think everyone in this country should support a verifiable nuclear freeze and a verifiable way to disarm, certainly nuclear weapons.
We already have in this country as much or more civil disobedience of all different kinds as we saw in the height of the Vietnam War, if not more. The 1,600 who were arrested in June 14th in New York, the largest number in a single day in our history for civil disobedience, and the disobedience, the trespass at Livermore was the second largest in the country's history, the largest in the West Coast, in California. I think that too was really a warning of what is to come, that people in very large numbers are awakening to the moral and legal aspects of the policies that this country is announcing and which Livermore is implementing, the policies of threat and of preparation for a first strike. That is a preparation for an act, a first use of nuclear weapons, which has been repeatedly identified in the UN by the great majority of nations in the world as not only criminal, but the gravest international crime. American people have not had much influence on the operations of Livermore and the kinds of weapons they produced, or the numbers, or the functions of those weapons. They haven't really known what the planning was. In fact, the people at Livermore, with all their clearances, I'm sure very few of them know, in fact, what their weapons have been used for and what they're intended to be used for. When I say that they have been used, I mean they've been used in the way that you use a gun when you point it in an alley, criminally, I would say, in many cases. But in any case, when you point it at someone's head, whether you pull the trigger or not, you're using the gun. We have used our nuclear weapons that way, and that's what they're for, the new ones that Livermore is producing. I doubt if very many Livermore people know that, and I know that most American citizens don't know that. I think that what we were doing at Livermore, by showing a willingness to go to jail, to oppose this, was to raise the question of who the real criminals are in this case, of what the real legal dimensions of this problem are, and more importantly, the moral as well as political dimensions of this.
If there's anyone in this audience or anyone that you speak to that would like to know how do we describe the insanity of the arms race, tell them this story. Tell them that you have likened the arms race to two men standing in a locked room, both up to their necks in gasoline, one with 10 matches in his hand, the other with 7 matches in his hand, and the one with 10 matches saying, I need 15 matches before we can negotiate not striking a damn match in a room full of gasoline. Now therein lies the insanity of the nuclear arms race. This country is talking about moving far beyond deterrence. If you read the supporting documents for the military budget for fiscal 1983, it says it is in part our goal to develop the capability to fight, to survive, and to win a nuclear war. Well, anyone who thinks we can fight, survive, and win a nuclear war, by definition, is psychotic, and we want to make that statement clear today. Secondly, I would like to admonish you about something about which you already know. Politicians thrive in an atmosphere of ambiguity. This movement must not be ambiguous. If we are to talk about a nuclear freeze, we must define it. I am afraid that many of my colleagues will support a freeze that says, I believe in freezing weapons bilaterally, verifiably, and then they will oppose any efforts to strike weapons. You've got to make it clear that we don't need a bilateral negotiation with the Soviet Union to know that the MX missile is insane. We don't need to negotiate with the Soviet Union to know the Trident II missile is insane. You don't need to negotiate with the Soviet Union to know that deploying Pershing missiles 4 minutes from the Soviet Union when we were prepared to go to nuclear war, when there were missiles in Cuba, is insane. You don't need to negotiate with the Soviet Union to know that the B-1 bomber program is a $40 billion waste of resources. You don't need to negotiate with the Soviet Union to know that it is a contradiction to talk about a treaty that is verifiable, and you are presently developing weapons that are beyond verifiability. Let this movement have specificity.
I'm protesting what Livermore has been doing for many years, which is to produce new warheads that are needed not for deterring nuclear attack on the United States or its allies, but for threatening a first strike, weapons that are designed to disarm Soviet weapons and depose the threat that we might escalate a non-nuclear conflict into a nuclear one, or actually go for a first strike, an all-out attempt to disarm the Soviet Union, which has been the basis of our NATO planning and much of our planning in the rest of the world for a long time. We started making threats like that at a period when the Soviets had no ability to reply. We had a monopoly on nuclear weapons. And effectively, we had a monopoly on the strategic ability to deliver nuclear weapons against the homeland of the adversary for almost 20 years, but we've continued this policy of threatening a first strike into an era that's now a dozen years old, when the Soviets had every ability to retaliate devastatingly. These threats then are less likely to work, more likely to force us to carry them out. And if carried out, they mean the death of the Northern Hemisphere.
Then the question is, what is security? Are we more secure by having an upward cycling arms race with no arms negotiations? Are we more secure by having more weapons? I think the evidence is that it's a false security because the arms race is more out of control than ever. The arms race is inflationary. The arms race consumes money that could go to people's needs in this country, and that's insecurity to me. And if you want to talk about real security, national defense and deterrence is part of it. But the key, I think, if you look at the Japanese, is economic security or energy security. And our military does not give us economic security. It may defend us against the hypothetical invasion of Russian tanks, but it does not do anything about the very real invasion of better Japanese and German products.
In 1971, when we went to Congress, the military budget was between $80 and $90 billion. 10 years later, it was $173 billion. In 1982, it was $222 billion. In fiscal 1983, Ronald Reagan is asking for $258 billion. In 1985, he'll ask for $325 billion. In 1987, it'll be $422 billion. By 1990, it'll be $500 billion. Part of what this is all about is to reject the madness of spending $4.5 trillion in the next 10 years, building a monument to military madness.
Each billion-dollar increase in military allocations cost the United States 13,000 civilian jobs. Currently, over half of U.S. tax dollars are used to finance military programs and pay for past wars. Both Soviet and American strategic forces are based on the triad concept. The United States strategic arsenal is diversified. About 50% of the warheads are on submarines, 24% on silo-based ICBMs, and 26% on bombers. The Soviets rely most heavily on ICBMs, which carry 75% of their nuclear inventory. 26% are submarine-based, and only 5% are on bombers. By the mid-1960s, the U.S. had deployed 1,000 silo-based Minuteman missiles and began developing multiple warhead systems, MIRVs, that allowed each missile to carry several weapons. Spurred by that move, the Soviets embarked on a crash program that has led to a current strength of 1,400 ICBMs. Although they now have more silo-based missiles than the U.S., they are significantly behind in the total number of nuclear warheads. By the mid-60s, the U.S. had also deployed 41 Polaris submarines with over 650 missiles. This is the most secure leg of the American triad, since 40% of our Polaris and the newer Poseidon and Trident submarines are constantly on war patrol and immune from a first strike. Each American Poseidon-class submarine carries enough missiles to obliterate every major Soviet city. Who is ahead in the arms race? The U.S. leads in the total number of nuclear warheads, but the Soviets are ahead in the total weight of warheads. American missiles are more accurate, and the Soviets have more launchers. From this perspective, neither side has a decisive military advantage, and the situation can be characterized as essential equivalence.
The U.S. has never been willing to commit itself, through our president or through a treaty, not to initiate nuclear war, that is, a no-first-use commitment. The Soviet Union has often proposed a bilateral no-first-use commitment, and just this year has now made a unilateral commitment never to initiate the use of nuclear weapons. The U.S. has always refused even a bilateral commitment, and so far President Reagan has refused to match the Soviet commitment not to initiate nuclear war. The weapons designed by Livermore are basically and almost entirely designed to implement that implicit and often explicit threat of initiating nuclear warfare.
And so we have to station military personnel and bases in the Middle East, and we have to prepare for a showdown with the Soviet Union over the Persian Gulf. We have to back up our resolve for that showdown, not by continuing these sort of cowardly, it's implied, these cowardly arms control negotiations. We have to expand the amount of plutonium that we have available in this country. We have to expand the number of nuclear weapons. We have to introduce and legitimize the idea of a limited nuclear war, because why else would you have nuclear weapons if you couldn't use them? Why not just declare that you're a coward, a pacifist, and surrender? You have to be able to show that you have the manly ability to use them if necessary. Otherwise, the Soviet Union's going to extend its influence over the Middle East, take our oil. That'll be the end of us. No more gas-guzzling cars, no more gas-heated swimming pools. What's the point of it?
I don't believe that the people who are currently promoting the next stage in the arms race sincerely believe that there can ever be an end to the arms race. In fact, when they talk, when Reagan and others talk about their readiness to reduce weapons, when you look closely at the fine print, you find that they're reducing numbers, basically, of obsolescent weapons, while they have every intention and expectation of continuing to produce new weapons indefinitely. Certainly, Livermore lives by the testing and design of new weapons.
So what are the methods of verifying nuclear disarmament?
Well, I think really the only acceptable method is on-site inspection. I'm not an expert on those types of things, but that's my feeling, that no agreement can be verified, that it has to be, both sides have to have the ability to inspect for nuclear weapons anywhere.
It has to be realized, for example, that we're able to read license plates in Moscow now in terms of photographic reconnaissance, seismic stations and seismic capabilities, infrared, other kinds of electronic surveillance, and make for an enormous amount of data as to such operations. I think the most objective experts at this point, including people who've worked for CIA and for the weapons labs like Herbert York, have no doubt really that such a ban can be adequately verified.
To reach a stage where we can blow away the mothers and the children and the families and everybody, boom, just like that. And somehow that's still okay in some people's minds.
Many countries now have enough plutonium from their energy programs and their research programs to make at least crude nuclear weapons, and a lot of them. And by the end of the century, the Committee for Economic Development has estimated that from that source alone, from so-called peaceful energy programs, there will be enough material for 1 million Hiroshima weapons in the hands of 100 different countries. That's 20 years away. But with much closer than that, we have half a dozen to a dozen countries that could go almost within a matter of months, the possession of nuclear weapons. The other side of that is that year by year, as these countries have watched the two superpowers absolutely fail, both of them, in their obligations to bring the arms race and testing to a halt and to reverse it, obligations that they assumed in the end of the 60s in connection with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, their willingness either to sign that treaty if they haven't already done it, or to maintain their ratification of the treaty is almost surely fading. And I think if the policies of the Reagan administration, their unwillingness even to discuss a comprehensive test ban with the Soviets right now, their unwillingness even to discuss a freeze, an end to the arms race with the Soviet Union, if that persists much longer, then I think we'll see a number of nations finally imitating the two superpowers and acquiring nuclear weapons for the same purposes they see the two superpowers using them for foreign policy, for threats of first use, for prestige, for a variety of technological reasons that will, I think, point them in the same direction that we followed.
The attractiveness of atomic energy on rational grounds is zero to these third world countries. To the extent that it has any appeal in these third world countries, it's because people in the third world countries want nuclear weapons faster, or because they say if it's safe enough for Americans, it's safe enough for us. Well, if Americans show that A, it is not safe for Americans, and B, that they will not permit their country to be used as a mechanism of proliferating nuclear weapons, that'll be the end of nuclear exports by Westinghouse and General Electric.
I think that a world in which the superpowers continue their uninhibited expansion of new weapons, in which the U.S. is still leading the way by 4 to 5 years, and in which other countries, up to perhaps 100, acquire those weapons in imitation, I don't believe that's a world in which the human species can long survive. And I think most people see that in the same terms. And as they are now coming to understand the real risks of what's going on, I think they will act as effectively as they can to stop that process.
What we're here to tell you is that we need your help to get a message across, because it is really deadly, it's really scary, and it affects everybody here and all our kids and our kids' kids. And it's no joke, you know.
What we have to do is see that nothing happens here that would make the planet come to a big grinding halt in terms of human life.
There's a lot of people out there, a huge constituency in America, that are angry at the policy of our administration. They're raising their voice by the millions throughout the country and throughout the planet, and we're here just helping move that giant ball right along.
The reason musicians have to speak out is because the media, the people that own the media in this country, don't give proper attention to the other side of the issue, which is that those of us who feel that the nuclear arms buildup is madness, unnecessary, certain to, it's like committing suicide for the planet as far as I'm concerned.
Some of them will